My story starts in a small village, a place where life moved with the rhythm of the sun. We were a community held together by tradition, by stories passed down through generations. I was just a boy, 14 years old, full of the simple joys of youth. My world was my mother's smile, the dust between my toes, and the laughter of my friends. Life was predictable, and in its predictability there was comfort. I knew who I was, or at least I thought I did. I was a son, a friend, a part of a vibrant tapestry woven with the threads of our shared history and culture. Every day was a lesson in belonging, a quiet affirmation that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Then came the season when the elders called. It was time. Time for me to become a man. This is a rite of passage, a sacred journey that every boy in my village was expected to take. It was an honor, they said, a path to respect. I was to go to the initiation school, a secluded place in the mountains, hidden from the world. My family was proud. My mother packed my small bag with a heavy heart but a hopeful smile. She believed this journey would forge me into a strong, honorable man. I tried to share their excitement, to feel the pride they felt for me, but a seed of unease had already been planted in my young heart. Leaving my home felt like stepping out of a warm, sunlit room into a sudden, chilling shadow. The familiar sounds of the village, the chickens clucking, the distant chatter of this market, faded behind me as I walked with the other boys toward the mountains. I looked back one last time, memorizing the shape of our small house against the horizon. I was leaving behind everything I knew. The journey was supposed to be about finding myself, about being reborn as a man. But as we climbed higher, the air growing colder, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking away from the very person I was meant to be, leaving a part of my spirit behind in the valley below. The elders who led us spoke of honor and tradition. They told us we were following in the footsteps of our fathers and their fathers before them. It was a path paved with history, a sacred duty. They said the mountain would test us, and the rituals would purify us. I listened to their words, nodding like the other boys, but my mind was a whirlwind of questions. What did it truly mean to be a man? Did it mean leaving behind the warmth of your mother's love for the cold of the mountain? Did it mean trading laughter for silence and questions for blind obedience? I didn't have the answers, but I knew deep down that this path felt less like a calling and more like a command. The initiation school was not a school at all. It was a clearing in the bush, raw and exposed to the elements. Our shelter was a makeshift hut, a fragile shield against the biting winter wind that howled through the skeletal trees. The nights were the worst. The cold was a physical thing, a predator that sank its teeth into your bones and refused to let go. We huddled together for warmth, a small group of boys wrapped in thin blankets, our breath turning to mist in the frigid air. The stars above were brilliant and indifferent, scattered across a black canvas, a silent audience to our shivering misery. This place was a world away from the gentle comforts of home. The rituals began almost immediately, and they were a brutal shock to my system. This was not the noble tradition I had been promised. It was a theater of pain, shrouded in secrecy. The elders, their faces stern and unreadable in the flickering firelight, enforced a strict code of silence and submission. We were taught that a man does not cry, a man does not question, a man endures. The lessons were harsh, designed to break our spirits, to strip away the boy and leave behind something hard and unfeeling. The air was thick with fear, a smell as pungent as the wood smoke that stung our eyes and filled our lungs. I saw things that I cannot unsee. I heard sounds that will echo in my mind forever. The days were a blur of grueling tasks and harsh discipline, but the nights were when the true terror unfolded. The ceremonies were performed under the cloak of darkness, away from prying eyes. They were violent and confusing, a chaotic storm of chanting and pain that made no sense to my 14-year-old mind. I watched as boys, my friends, tried to be brave, their faces contorted in a silent scream as they endured what was demanded of them. I learned that fear was a weakness we had to hide, but it was always there, a constant companion in that cold, lonely place. My fear grew into a quiet rebellion inside of me. I looked at the faces of the elders, and I didn't see wisdom. I saw a rigid adherence to a past that was hurting its own children. I looked at the other boys, their eyes vacant, their spirits dimming with each passing day. And I knew this was wrong. This wasn't making us men. It was hollowing us out. It was teaching us that our bodies were not our own, that our pain did not matter. I began to understand that true manhood couldn't be born from fear. It couldn't be carved with a blade of cruelty. It had to come from somewhere else, somewhere true. The decision to run came to me in the dead of night. It wasn't a grand, heroic plan. It was a desperate whisper from the part of me that refused to be extinguished. I waited until the fires had burned down to embers, and the snores of the guards were a low rumble in the darkness. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird, each beat a drum of terror and hope. I had no shoes, no food, nothing but the thin clothes on my back and a fierce, burning need to be free. Slipping out of the hut was the first step. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sounded like a gunshot in the profound silence of the bush. The cold was immediate and shocking. The frozen ground was a bed of needles against my bare feet. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. The darkness was absolute, a thick blanket that swallowed everything. I stumbled over rocks and roots, my feet quickly becoming numb and raw. Fear was my shadow, chasing me, whispering that I would be caught, that I would be dragged back and punished for my defiance. But another feeling was growing stronger with every painful step: determination. I was running not just from the camp, but towards a future where I could be my own person. The night was a long and terrifying journey. The sounds of the wild, which had once been a comforting lullaby in my village, were now a source of dread. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of an unseen animal in the undergrowth. Each sound sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I kept moving, guided only by the faint glow of the moon peeking through the clouds. My body screamed in protest, my lungs burned, my legs ached, and my feet were a mess of cuts and bruises. But my spirit pushed me forward. I thought of my mother, of the warmth of her kitchen, and it became a beacon in the cold, unforgiving wilderness. As the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of gray and pink, I saw it. The faint outline of a road. It was a lifeline, a connection back to the world I had left behind. I collapsed at the edge of it, exhausted and shivering, my body a map of my struggle. I had made it through the night. I was still alive. I was free. That single powerful thought was warmer than any blanket, more nourishing than any food. Lying there on the cold asphalt, I wasn't a failed initiate. I was a boy who had listened to his own heart and had chosen his own path, no matter how hard it was. Years passed. I grew older, and the boy who ran barefoot through the winter night became a man. But I became a man on my own terms. I found freedom not on that mountain, but in the journey away from it. I built a life for myself, a life filled with choices, with learning, and with the kind of love that doesn't demand pain as payment. The scars on my feet faded, but the memories of that time remained. For a long time, I kept them locked away, a dark secret I was afraid to share. I was ashamed, thinking my story was one of failure, of not being strong enough to endure the tradition of my people. But freedom is a funny thing. It's not just about escaping a physical place. It's about freeing your mind and your voice. As I grew more confident in the man I had become, I realized my story wasn't about failure at all. It was a story of survival, of courage. It was about a boy who, in the face of immense pressure, chose to honor his own sense of right and wrong. I started to see that keeping my story silent was letting the fear win. It was allowing the shadows of the past to dictate the light of my present. The silence was its own kind of prison, and I had been living in it for far too long. So I decided to speak. I started small, sharing my experience with trusted friends. Then I began to write. Putting the words on paper was like letting go of a breath I had been holding for years. I wrote about the cold, the fear, and the pain. But I also wrote about the run, the determination, and the overwhelming relief of seeing that dawn. I realized that my story was not just mine. It belonged to any child who has ever been scared, any person who has ever felt trapped by expectations, and anyone who has ever had to fight for the right to be themselves. Sharing my truth became my purpose. It's a message that bravery isn't always about enduring pain in silence. Sometimes true bravery is about saying no. It's about walking away from a path that harms you, even if it's a path that has been walked for generations. It's about finding the courage to tell your story, no matter how difficult it is to speak. Because when we share our hard truths, we don't just free ourselves. We light a path for others who might be lost in the dark, showing them that they are not alone and that a different dawn is always possible.